Hello and welcome to JRT. I'm your host Johnny and tonight we review Portal 2 for Science. Released back in 2007 as the most inconspicuous part of the orange box and promptly stealing the whole show, few games have ever been as universally beloved as the original Portal. And that's because Valve are experts with a sleight of hand. They also seem to share my views on first-person shooters, in that while they all make ludicrous amounts of money, most of them are bland, boring, predictable, unmemorable games. The guys at Valve think that most shooters have incidental, paper-thin storylines that have no impact on the gameplay and are mostly there to give the player something to read during the loading screens. And that's terrible. So they set out to make a first-person shooter, where the story would be its most important part, and the player would always remain in control of the avatar, even when the exposition happens. They think that shooters nowadays are taking themselves too seriously, with their dull graphics, realistic weapon loadouts, and emphasis on safe, exploit-based builds, so they make Team Fortress 2, with bright colors, cartoony models, wacky protagonists, and an emphasis on having fun, no matter your playstyle. They think that most of them paradoxically consider their main campaign as a secondary feature, leading to many players skipping it altogether and jumping straight to the multiplayer. So they make Left 4 Dead, a game where the main campaign is the multiplayer. And of course, they think there are other genres that deserve the amount of attention shooters seem to automatically get. So they make a puzzle game, disguise it as a shooter, hide it in a battle with some of the most anticipated FPSs in recent times, and thus trick the masses into giving it a chance. And the masses were enraptured. When you go in thinking the physics puzzles in Half-Life 2 are the bee's knees, and a cryptic whip from an ambiguously omnipotent entity is the smartest thing ever put in a script, you can't help but be floored with Portal's truly inspired writing and fun puzzle mechanics. That's not to say Portal wasn't a great game to begin with, but it certainly was pushed by the circumstances surrounding it. It even was the endearing underdog, the little pet project that no one could peg would emerge as the most important thing to come out of the orange box. But it was, which means that Portal 2 has some big shoes to fill, and it has to do it without any of the circumstantial bonuses the first one enjoyed. Prospective buyers now know what to expect, and if anything, this time there is a bad vibe surrounding the game, courtesy of the pre-release arc. Valve's alternate reality game certainly was a stroke of marketing genius, but it also left everyone following it with a sour taste. A taste our protagonist, Cell, should know all too well. A glorified labyrinth that simply never gives up, Cell survived the increasingly sadistic tests conducted in the Aperture Science labs, mounted a counter-offensive against the sociopathic artificial intelligence GLaDOS that was running them, managed to actually destroy her and make her way out, only to be recaptured at the last second and put back into hibernation. With freedom vanishing from within her grasp, I'm not certain if Cell thinks her ordeal in the original Portal was worth it, but I do know she'd be more than willing to try again, and she'll get to do just that in Portal 2. With literally every human in Aperture Science either dead or incapacitated, and the only AI capable of running things out of commission, Cell begins his adventure seemingly stuck in an endless loop of waking up every 50 days for a short checkup, then going right back to a dreamless sleep. But between the lack of proper management and the earth-shattering events happening elsewhere in the Half-Life universe, it's no wonder that the loop eventually breaks and Cell only wakes up untold years later and just as her entire wing is about to fall to pieces. She is visited by Whitley, a personality sphere voiced by Steven Merchant, who is in dire need of a pair of hands to carry him around and operate the Aperture Science handheld portal device in order to make his escape, and of course, Cell jumps at the chance to tag along.
Okay, what you're doing there is jumping. You just jumped.
Whitley is quickly established as a comic relief, which is a common enough role for a sidekick, but a relatively jarring one for an advanced artificial intelligence. Indeed, despite his desire to play the knight in shining armor, it's Cell who has to do all the work. Whitley does try his best to help, but he almost always fails, and at times, his Legia was scientifically designed to be a hindrance. This is to be expected really, as the brilliant but bizarre minds in Aperture Science seem dedicated to giving their AIs personalities that came in direct contrast with their designed purpose. As beautifully demonstrated by the turrets, which, despite being programmed to kill you dead, have undeniable charm.
Could you come over here?
Adorable.
Please put me down.
A great deal of the humor in the Portal series emerges from these mismatched personalities, and the cake has to go to another character voiced by Ellen McLean, GLaDOS. Yes, it's no surprise that Sally and Whitley end up unwittingly reactivating her, as it wouldn't really be Portal without our favorite deceitful AI. Originally designed to optimally organize and run tests for science, but personally taking the greatest pleasure when her test subjects agonizingly fail, GLaDOS is back and she's as sadistic and petty as ever. She really can't get over Cell killing her all those years ago, so she doesn't bother much with her well-meaning facade, but is instead quite openly trying to psych her out. She goes about it with a variety of methods, but my favorite has to be how she keeps implying she's fat.
I want to congratulate you on beating the odds and somehow managing to pack on a few pounds.
So, Valve's complete understanding of why this simple setup works is the reason the Portal series are consistently exceedingly funny despite having such a small cast and very few opportunities to play one character of another. In Portal 2, they even managed to revisit all the fan favorite moments from the original without making it seem too forced, for the most part. What Valve does not manage to do well this time around is disguise how linear and formulaic Portal is. Sure, there are plenty of secrets to be found, but there aren't really any alternate routes. There's always only one way forward. You might spot an exceptional Easter egg by diverging sideways from the path for a bit, but you'll need to get back on track if you want to proceed with the actual story. And how predictably hard-coded the boundaries is especially evident by the lack of interaction while you are trying to solve a puzzle. This is probably what makes the deadly turrets all the more endearing, as they are practically the only ones that react to your efforts to clear the room. For the rest, it's strictly formula. Quip, puzzle room, quip, loading screen. Quip, puzzle room, quip, loading screen. Not that this is unforgivably bad or disappointing, but it is quite jarring. In many ways, it reminds me of the Sands of Timer of Prince of Persia, where you'd get a noisy fight or cutscene, then a quiet platform puzzle. The contrast probably worked a bit better there, and you also had an epic quest to save the kingdom, as opposed to the modest, but still respectable quest of saving your own hide. You might also say that Portal is a bit like the fun and simple high-profile iPhone games like Cut the Rope. They have a clean, minimal design with nothing to distract you from the puzzle at hand, much like the individual tests in Portal. Of course, the obvious difference is that while Cut the Rope transitions abruptly from one puzzle to the next, Portal connects its test chamber with the aforementioned expertly written banter. It's just that while you are in the puzzle, you get a similar feeling of isolation from a narrative. But what are the puzzles in Portal about anyway? Well, at their core, they're about getting from a room's irrevocably locked entrance to its exit. Sometimes you'll need to divert power to the exit door first, often you'll need to turn the room's obstacles on their heads to clear a path, and you'll always need to use the only two pieces of equipment Cell has on her person. The long fall resistance boots that somehow absorb momentum on impact, allowing for a variety of athletic feats without fear of breaking dozens of bones, and the Aperture Science handheld portal device. Best known as the seminal portal gun, this little beauty can place a pair of portals that are magically interconnected through space, allowing for instantaneous teleportation between them, which is about as cool as it sounds and offers a myriad of possibilities for thinking outside the box. Of course, you can't just place a portal anywhere, as that would make things too easy. Only surfaces covered with moon dust have sufficient sciencey magic to conduct a portal. I like to call them the superbly inaccurate portable surfaces, and you can usually count on any clean, white, flat surface to be one. The question is, how many puzzles can this concept carry before it starts getting old? Well, it's certainly over 100, because that's about how many we've covered in the two Portal games so far, and they've all managed to remain minty fresh. This because it's fairly easy to add new elements to the table and make an old solution apply in a new way. Placing one portal on the ceiling and one on the floor, then perpetually falling through them to generate momentum, then placing the exit portal on the wall to launch yourself over a pit, was easily the most popular trick in the original, but we remarkably don't really see it even once in the sequel. Instead, we get prismatic cubes that can divert laser beams, hard-light bridges that can predictably be transported through portals to instantly bridge chasms, but can also be used as force fields to protect against turret fire, and excursion funnel tractor beams that are the implement I love to hate. All these appear gradually throughout Portal 2 to make its chamber feel unique and its solution more ingenious than the last. The puzzles are never amazingly hard if you think about them, but they always make you feel like you have accomplished something amazingly cool when you clear them. So, with the story being so entertaining and the gameplay so fulfilling, it's no wonder that Portal 2 goes by like a breeze. But just as you reach the point where the original Portal would end, Portal 2 hits you with its twist. Of course, I'm not going to say exactly what it is, but it forces Cell back to the dark foundations of aperture science. Act 2 fills us in on some important backstory, but unfortunately, it is also the worst part of the entire game by far. Now, I realize it was Valve's intention to weird the player out, with the obvious clash between the immaculate test chambers we've seen so far and the death trap of a facility we're forced to soldier through now, but they are weirding us out for too long. This ghastly setting also makes how linear the game is all the more evident, since, despite the apparent vastness of it all, you are still railroaded through a very specific narrow path. When you are stuck in a test chamber, you start going through all the parameters in your head until the solution clicks. It's a challenge and working it out is fun. When you are stuck here, your only option is to tediously scan the room until you make out the single wall where you are allowed to place a portal. This isn't a test of wits anymore, and the game suddenly feels less like Portal and more like Where's Wally. This goes on for about half of the second act, and even the deliciously humming performance by J.K. Simmons and the introduction of a couple more puzzle elements are not much of a consolation. These don't really start to shine until Portal 2 finally stops trying to make you feel weird and resumes trying to make you feel clever. The greatest editor-in-chief ever plays Aperture Science CEO and prototypical mad scientist Gabe Johnson, and he is wonderful. But the fact we can only hear him in canned pre-record messages obviously means he can't build a rapport with Cell like GLaDOS or Whitley. The new puzzle elements we get are the gels, sciencey goo you can spread over a surface to make it extra bouncy with the blue gel, or extra slippery and friction-free with the orange one. These are exciting to experiment with at first, but it takes a while before they are put to satisfying use. The puzzle rooms here also raise a couple of questions, because while they seem like they were built before the invention of the portal gun, they paradoxically require thinking with portals to clear them. Now, sometimes this is somewhat justified, as the unintended facility just happened to crumble in a way that makes portals mandatory. By the way, how serendipitous is it that the only way out has Cell going through every test complex, and in the right order? Anyway, my point is that plenty of the test chambers look mostly intact, and even these require using the portal gun. Wait, they were actually made with a gun in mind? But then, why did gel-related testing suddenly stop if it wasn't because they got a new toy to play with? Is it because they were going bankrupt? How can a company that holds the keys to such groundbreaking technologies possibly go under anyway? And if they were going bankrupt, how did they buy the main ingredient for the white gel, which makes any surface portable? And shouldn't the bouncing gel really be colored green? We never get these answers, but thankfully we do get a return to form. Act 2 generates more and more momentum as it wraps up, and Act 3 is pure Portal, as we've always known and loved it, only turned up to 11. The writing is at its best, and the gameplay is damn near its best, and it is all punctuated by the ideal boss fight. It just might have the funniest dialogue yet, it's a culmination of most of the skills you've learned throughout the adventure, and it ends with an action so balls to the wall heavy metal awesome, even the flavor text for the achievement is "That just happened." It's ridiculous, it's hilarious, it's what every video game should make you feel. And it's certainly enough to make Portal 2 recommendable, even without looking into its much-touted multiplayer mode. Which is a mode definitely worth looking into, as it is expertly made as well. It features its own legitimate story, which, despite not being as good as a single-player one, is still very entertaining, with GLaDOS doing her trademark backhanded compliments and mischievous scheming without skipping a beat. The puzzles benefit from the co-op gimmick, either by using it to add a simple new spin on an old trick, or by taking full advantage of it and requiring feats that would be impossible without an extra pair of eyes and hands. It's definitely worth noting that both the hardest and the coolest two puzzles in the entirety of Portal are in the multiplayer mode. Quite possibly the only real flaw of the multiplayer is that you have to play it with another human being. Stop forcing me to socialize, Val! Friends are for doing tequila shots and karaoke support, not for flinging through giant killer fans. But in all seriousness, and although the game itself warns that the multiplayer is most fun with an actual friend, the random matchmaking in Portal 2 unexpectedly works rather well. We all know the internet is full of sadistic bastards, but most of the stories about grieving come from the versus modes of competitive games that naturally promote antagonism. The Portal 2 multiplayer is all about cooperation, and the series as a whole are more cerebral to boot. So I don't think it's a coincidence I don't have any horror stories, but have only encountered nice guys so far. Whether you are playing with a stranger or a friend, the thing that matters the most is communication, and this should be one of the deciding factors when choosing which version of Portal 2 to get. Although there is a cute automated gesture system and the extremely useful ability to ping specific spots on the map, you really need words to communicate what exactly you have in mind and go over a possible solution, especially for the more complicated puzzles. Most PC gamers have a mic, and they all have at the very least a keyboard. A headset is usually bundled with a 360, but few PlayStation 3 users have the Bluetooth headset. This is unfortunate because the PS3 version actually has some neat advantages, not the least of which is, grabbing it also scores you the PC version for free. The Source engine is built for the PC, but nowadays it scales nicely on the consoles, especially since they've decided to pepper Portal 2 with loading screens. And the controls are very simple. Only a few buttons are used, so they can easily be mapped intuitively to a controller. There are a couple of instances where the extra responsiveness of the mouse look can help, but it's nothing to write home about. What is definitely newsworthy is that, while most multi-platform games look better on the 360, and the PS3 edition of the Orange Box was a legendary atrocious port, this time Portal 2 is actually a bit better on the PlayStation 3. The 360 version is not bad though, and the whole thing predictably looks best on a PC, but the console versions do offer split-screen co-op play. So if I had to cross-evaluate the different versions, I'd say PS3, PC, 360. The only plus of the 360 version is the Xbox Live environment, which is decent, as opposed to the PlayStation Network, which is laughable. But as I said before, the PS3 version theoretically includes the PC one, so long as you are willing and able to enter the PlayStation Network to unlock it. So if you have a PS3 and aren't too cross with Sony's latest, greatest fail, you should only go for the PC version if you figure the possibility of split-screen co-op isn't worth an extra tenner. The Source engine is getting a bit old, so it only takes a decent PC to run Portal 2 properly. The game still managed to look gorgeous, for the most part, with its futuristic test rooms and meticulous attention to detail, but it does sometimes show its age, especially in that dreaded second act. The level design takes an extra hit in those segments too, but at least you can still rest assured that you'll never need to backtrack or mess up irreversibly and be forced to fall to your death and start from a previous checkpoint. I did manage to glitch the game at one point though, and I was so surprised Valve let that one through, I wondered if I was actually supposed to start floating around, until I started clipping through objects. The sound design is possibly as good as it gets. The voice acting, the song selection, the sound effects, they're all damn near perfect. The highest point of an overall package made almost entirely of high points. There is really only one feature missing from Portal 2 that I'd have really loved to see. Maybe in place of the silly Robot Enrichment DLC that no one should bother with. A full-fledged level editor / test designer. The story might be an integral part of Portal and what takes it to the next level, but I would have been adequately entertained with the puzzle rooms alone, and I'd love to see what the community is able to come up with. And in case you're worried the few good user-created levels would only get drowned in a sea of terrible ones, as it happens in Little Big Planet, you only need a couple no-brainer measures to prevent that. Make the creator have to finish his level without cheats before being able to submit it, create a user-based rating system that works. But as neat as that feature would be, it's small potatoes compared to what Portal 2 actually does offer. It's funny, it's clever, it makes you feel clever, it's great fun. A big portion of the second act is relatively tedious, which makes the single player a bit less replayable than the original Portal, but it does have the multiplayer which instantly makes up for that. So overall, I do think that Portal 2 is the better game of the two. That's of course my very own subjective opinion. What's called hard science fact is that it takes great effort not to enjoy Portal 2, and buying it is a decision you won't soon regret. Thanks for watching the show, have a great night, this is Johnny, signing out.